In every NBA draft, there was always the hope and prospect of a team landing a future franchise player, a player that would one day be an all-time great, and there is also the fear of selecting a player with a high pick that ends up not amounting to much of anything in the NBA. And while some draft classes have been more notable than others, some that featured multiple Hall of Famers and superstar level players like the draft classes of 1984, 1996, and 2003, you also have the occasional weaker draft classes that could barely produce more than one all-star, like the draft classes of 2000, 2004, or even more recently in 2013, with the exception of Giannis Antetokounmpo, of course. But no draft class in recent history has been more hyped than that of the 2014 draft class, which was predicted to be potentially the greatest draft class since 2003, which featured LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade. In fact, this class was touted as being so stacked that if you had a lottery pick going into this draft, you were going to be getting a potential franchise player in return, especially if you had the number 1 or number 2 picks, which for most, it was consensus that it was going to be between Andrew Wiggins and Jabari Parker, both players considered to be once-in-a-generation level players that could turn your franchise around. For a time, Andrew Wiggins was viewed to be the greatest prospect since LeBron James, and the hashtag Tank for Wiggins was one of the biggest trends on social media in the 2013-14 season. And yet, fast forward to today, and this apparent stacked draft class, one that was hyped to be along the lines of the classes like 03, 96, and 84, the entire class has only produced 5 all-star players in total, only 3 of which have been all-stars more than once, and only 2 players who have ever been selected to an All-NBA team more than once, one of which was a guy that was actually drafted in the second round. So what happened? Why was such a hype draft class that so many teams were getting excited to lose throughout that season to be able to land one of these top picks become such a dud of a draft class? Were the players just simply not as good as top scouts thought that they were? Did they just not develop into the players people thought that they would become once entering the NBA? Or was it something else? Well, in this video, we're going to be revisiting the 2014 draft class, looking at some of the top selections and trying to decipher how this became one of the most underwhelming hype draft classes of all time. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy the content, then consider subscribing, as this is a newly created channel and about 92% of you watching are not subscribed, so it would mean a great deal to me if you did. That way you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this all season long. Now, as I mentioned, going into the 2013-14 season, really even in the 2013 offseason, everyone was talking about this up-and-coming young prospect out of Canada in Andrew Wiggins. Wiggins was the number 1 overall recruit coming out of high school in 2013. An incredibly gifted athlete, a high flyer, quick first step in his ability to slash to the basket, but also a great shooter and a decent defender. Again, some people laugh at it now, but Andrew Wiggins was seen as the next great prospect since LeBron James, a generational talent that you could build around for the future. Sure enough, Wiggins gets selected number 1 overall by the Cavs before getting moved in that deal that sent Kevin Love to the Cavs to play alongside LeBron and Kyrie Irving. And although Wiggins won Rookie of the Year and was good, especially when it came to scoring, he by no means was showing flashes of a future superstar or future Hall of Famer in the making. For the most part, a lot of people were calling him an empty stats player. Could get you numbers on a bad team, but didn't really impact winning all that much. And that kind of held true up until the last 2 seasons, after he really embraced his role on the Warriors, being more of a third option, sometimes a second option. And this past season, Wiggins was selected to his first All-Star game. Although, as good as he's been and was last season for the Warriors, he probably shouldn't have been an All-Star, especially an All-Star starter, but we'll let that slide. But regardless, it's safe to say at age 27 and in his 9th season in the NBA, he is not going to be that superstar, generational level player, greatest prospect since LeBron James type of player that we thought he was going to become. The other guy who was also seen as a generational talent, there was even speculation if he potentially was going to be selected number 1. He was the 3rd overall recruit out of high school. He gets drafted to the Bucks number 2 overall, and right away he gets riddled with injuries, and that was Jabari Parker. Tears his ACL in his rookie season, only played 25 games. Yet again, tears his ACL a couple years later, and even though he showed some signs of being a great NBA player, with the rise of Giannis and Parker being a fairly one-dimensional player with his poor defense and not really being a great rebounder for a power forward, the Bucks decided to move on from him, let him become a free agent, which the Bulls signed him to a deal. Mistake. They trade him before the season even ends after that first year signing him, and he effectively becomes out of the rotation, and out of the rotation on a rebuilding team, mind you. And Jabari Parker never really was able to regain his career in the NBA, and he is currently not even playing in the NBA despite just being 27 years old. So right away, 2 thought to be generational level prospects. 1 has been a decent player, won a championship, is by no means a superstar though, and the other is already out of the NBA. Now, some of you might be wondering, who were the 5 All-Stars from this draft class I mentioned earlier, because I think it's, good to touch on the players who have actually lived up to their expectations, to an extent anyway. And that was, of course, Andrew Wiggins, who just made his first All-Star team, Julius Randle, who made the All-Star team for the first time in 2021 and really has since kind of fallen off since getting that nice extension after the season from the Knicks, Zach LaVine, 2-time All-Star for these past 2 seasons. He was selected 13th overall in 2014. And while Zach has been great for the Bulls and really continued to get better and better with every passing season since he was traded there from the Wolves, even as a Bulls fan myself, I would not consider Zach LaVine to be a superstar in the NBA. Sure, I guess I could see him getting there because he's only 27, he's in his prime. He could, in theory, still get better and really take that next step in being one of the best players in the NBA. But I do have a hard time seeing it unless LaVine really improves his game on defense. Also, LaVine isn't having the best start to this season now after signing a max contract. And then there are the 2 by far and away best players from this draft class who are actual superstars, who are actual franchise players and likely future Hall of Famers, one of which was drafted 3rd overall and the other 41st, and that's Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic, who currently are arguably the best big men in the NBA. It took them both some time to get there. Embiid didn't even play in his first 2 seasons in the league due to injury. Took him a while to actually start ramping up playing consistent minutes before he really started taking off. And then Jokic, while very talented, didn't start showing signs of superstardom until his 3rd year in the league. And now, between both of these guys, multiple All-NBA selections, All-Star selections, Jokic has already won 2 MVPs. Embiid last season was the scoring champ and is also a 3-time All-Defensive Team player, one of the best two-way players in the game. These were the type of players for which you thought you were going to see multiple guys on this level of talent from this draft class. For the rest of the top 10, again, it was believed if you had a top 10 pick in this draft, you were going to be set. And number 4, the Orlando Magic select Aaron Gordon. Super athletic, really strong, great physique, a versatile forward coming out of Arizona. He was the number 4 overall recruit in 2013. And while Gordon has been a nice player, never really turned into being anything more than just a solid role player, a guy who can give you good scoring on decent efficiency. At number 5, the Jazz selected Dante Exum out of Australia. He turns out to be a bust, partially from injuries. He missed his whole sophomore season, and despite being a highly recruited international prospect, his game just never really translated well into the NBA. He was a little too small, wasn't that great of a passer for being a point guard, committed a lot of turnovers, wasn't a good shooter, and he didn't last that long in the league, only played 245 games and has been out of the league since 2020. Marcus Smart goes number 6 to the Boston Celtics, and Smart has been great. Just won Defensive Player of the Year, multiple All-Defensive Team selections, but again, not an All-Star, an elite defender, and has also become a great playmaker. I would say he's one of the more underrated players from this class, but then you remember that he was also taken 6th overall in a supposed stacked draft class. But at least unlike these other guys, Smart has been a very impactful player for the Celtics and has at least been consistent throughout his career. Julius Randle was taken 7th overall. You want to talk about inconsistency? That's Julius Randle. An up and down career, missed basically his whole rookie season with the Lakers. Starts showing some flashes of being a great scorer, signs a deal with the Pelicans, and after having a great season with the Pels, gets a nice contract to come play for the Knicks. And in his 2nd season with the New York Knicks, he has that breakout year in which he wins Most Improved Player of the Year, makes his first All-Star team, was selected 2nd team All-NBA, which is crazy. The Knicks have this stellar season where everyone thinks the Knicks are on the up and up, and finally, after being trash for so many years, they're going to start going places, and then they get crushed in the first round. Randle goes MIA in that series, and the following season it was almost like Randle forgot to shoot the ball. His efficiency tanked, especially when it came to his outside shooting, wasn't as strong on the glass, wasn't as effective of a passer, and that's still been the case for Randle as he continues to struggle this season. Then at number 8, Nick Stauskas. I don't know what the Kings were thinking with this pick, but then again, it is the Kings. Never really progressed into much of anything. He bounces around from team to team and was actually out of league by 2019 playing overseas. He's had some 10-day contracts more recently here and there, but yeah, safe to say a busted pick. Then at number 9, Noah Vonleh. A lot of scouts had high hopes for him. The number 8 overall recruit in the country coming out of high school, was viewed as a strong big with great footwork, but never really went anywhere in the NBA. Has bounced in and out of the league, playing overseas. Most recently has played for the Celtics, but yet again, by no means a franchise level player. Number 10 was Elfrid Payton, taken by the Magic. Also another player whose game didn't really translate well into the NBA. Another great college player. Was decent/average when it comes to his scoring, rebounding, and passing, but didn't really excel at any one particular thing in the league. Not at all a good shooter, a very poor free throw shooter, not very efficient. He's already out of the league as well. Outside of the top 10, really rounding out the lottery, you got McDermott goes 11. The Bulls traded up for him. Yeah, good shooter, but that's really it, a very one-dimensional player. Yet another instance of a great college player whose game just didn't translate well into the NBA. Dario Saric, who I actually was surprised went this high in that draft at number 12, didn't play last season due to ACL, hasn't played much this season. We covered Zach LaVine, one of the few all-stars from this class, and then at number 14, TJ Warren, who has been a decent player, has been getting better with every passing season with his scoring, but just hasn't been able to stay healthy more recently. He's played all but 4 games since 2020. And then outside of the lottery, you have some notable names like Yusuf Nurkic, Clint Capella, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Kyle Anderson, but for the most part, a lot of these players only played a handful of seasons in the NBA, not having much of an impact for their respective teams. So all of this long-winded commentary covering all of these draft picks in 2014, how did a class that was so talked about, such high expectations of producing multiple all-stars, multiple franchise players, become such a meh draft class 8 years later? Of course, some of it is injuries. Some of the guys suffered major injuries that really derailed their careers, but really the biggest reason was the poor recruiting of this class and thinking that players were going to be significantly better than they actually were. And a lot of it was that guys didn't develop and reach their true potential. You look at a guy like Wiggins, again, still a great player, but never reached that true ceiling with the immense talent that he has. The same goes for Julius Randle or even Aaron Gordon. These guys were seen as prodigies coming out of high school with super high ceilings. And whether it was just being in the wrong environment that didn't get the most out of their potential, or also just not having the motivation and work ethic to truly reach greatness, the guys just never turned into the players we thought that they would become. The other thing I'll say is that this was really the last draft class before the NBA started going into the era of three-point shooting and where players needed to have three-point shooting as part of their repertoire to be considered legit NBA prospects. The 2014 draft class was the last class where this wasn't as much of a focus. And if you look at all the lottery picks from this class, outside of Doug McDermott and even to an extent Zach LaVine, none of these guys were really known for their outside shooting. And while they're still good players in the NBA, they likely wouldn't have been as highly recruited as prospects of today with the NBA's focus on outside shooting and spacing the floor. I'm curious to know what you guys think on why the 2014 draft class did not end up being one of those historic draft classes we have seen in the past. Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.